Ethan Cole woke before the sun, the way men on the frontier learned to do if they intended to keep breathing. Sleep never held him long. It only circled, light and uneasy, leaving him half awake to every sound the land chose to make. The cabin lay quiet around him, washed in the ash-gray light that came just before morning decided whether it would be kind or cruel. The fire in the hearth had burned down to a faint glow, red embers breathing like a tired animal. Cold crept along the plank floor and settled into his bones. Ethan swung his legs over the side of the narrow bed and reached for his boots without looking. His rifle rested against the wall, close enough to touch. It always did. Years on the frontier had carved habits deeper than thought. Wake early. Check the door. Listen before moving. Trust nothing you hadn't tested with your own hands. He paused, standing still, breath slow. Something felt wrong, not loud enough to name, just a pressure beneath the silence. The kind that pressed against the back of his neck and refused to be ignored. The cabin smelled of smoke, leather, and old coffee grounds. Everything was where he'd left it the night before. The table scarred with knife marks. The saddle hanging by the door. No broken glass. No forced latch. Ethan had lived alone long enough to know the shape of his solitude. It had weight. It had sound. And this morning, it felt disturbed. He moved with care, muscles tight, grief and memory stitched into every motion. There were things he didn't let himself think about before dawn, faces he no longer saw, voices that no longer called his name. Out here, the past was a dangerous companion. Best kept quiet. His fingers brushed the rifle stock, familiar and steadying. That was when he saw her. She stood near the hearth, wrapped in one of his spare blankets, the dying fire casting low light across her face. She did not startle. Did not reach for a weapon. Did not move at all. Ethan froze. His hand tightened on the rifle by instinct, not from panic, but from preparation. Men survived out here by acting before fear had time to speak. Yet something in the woman's stillness stopped him from lifting the gun. She watched him calmly, dark eyes steady, unreadable. Not defiant. Not pleading. Simply aware. Long black hair fell loose over her shoulders, catching faint embers of firelight. Beneath the blanket, he could see hints of beadwork, careful patterns sewn into the edge of a dress. Her posture was straight, balanced, as if she stood on open ground rather than inside the cabin of a man who could kill her in a breath. Apache, he realized at once. The thought landed heavy. Not because of hatred, but because of consequence. The door behind her was still barred. The window unbroken. No sign of struggle. No sound had woken him. That unsettled him more than if the place had been torn apart. She had not forced her way in. "You are awake," she said softly. Her English was slow, deliberate. Each word chosen, shaped with care. Ethan didn't answer right away. He studied her hands, empty, relaxed at her sides. No knife. No tension. "How did you get in here?" he asked at last, voice low, rough with sleep and suspicion. She turned slightly toward the hearth, the fire reflecting in her eyes. "Because you showed mercy." The words struck deeper than any blade. Ethan's grip loosened on the rifle. His pulse thudded in his ears. He searched her face for threat and found none. Only resolve. Outside, the land remained quiet. Too quiet. He knew then that whatever had crossed his threshold this morning had not come by accident. The memory rose uninvited, sharp and clear. The trail had been empty that night, stretching long and pale beneath a broken moon. Ethan had been riding hard, eager to reach home before weather turned. That was when he saw the shape in the dirt, a man collapse just off the path, dark against darker ground. He could have ridden on. Most did. The frontier taught its lessons brutally. Stop for every stranger and you didn't live long. Especially not when the stranger wore the signs of an enemy people. Ethan had known that. Had felt it in his chest as he slowed his horse. The man was Apache. Badly wounded. Blood soaked the earth beneath him, dark and already cooling. His breathing came shallow, rattling. Ethan had sat there for a long moment, reins loose in his hands, weighing survival against conscience. No one would blame him for leaving. No one would ever know. Except him. He dismounted. He gave the man water, lifting his head carefully. Tore strips from his own shirt to bind the wounds, though he knew it was likely useless. Stayed when the breathing slowed. Stayed when the eyes lost focus. They did not speak much. Language failed where pain took over. But the man had looked at him once, long and searching, as if memorizing his face for a place beyond words. When death came, it came quietly. Ethan buried him with his own hands. Marked the place with stones. Said nothing aloud. Then rode on, heavier than when he had stopped. He had not done it for thanks. Not for forgiveness. Only because leaving felt worse. Now, standing in his cabin, he understood that mercy did not end where he thought it did. "He was my brother," the woman said. The words held no anger. No accusation. Only weight. Ethan swallowed. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He lowered his hand fully from the rifle. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't do it for—" "I know," she replied, interrupting him gently. "Before his spirit left, he spoke of you. He told our chief that a man stayed when death was near." She stepped closer. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulder, revealing more of the beadwork beneath, symbols Ethan didn't understand but felt carried meaning older than his world. "Among my people," she continued, "a life-given kindness must be answered. A brave act cannot be ignored." Outside, faint hoofbeats moved through the dark. Slow. Controlled. Circling. Ethan felt them more than heard them. Riders. Watching. Waiting. "I was sent as peace," she said. "But I came because I wished to." The fire crackled softly, as if in agreement. Ethan met her gaze, understanding settling into his bones. The night on the trail had not ended with burial stones. It had traveled. It had been spoken. Remembered. Mercy, he realized, was never just a moment. It was a path. And this one had led straight to his door. The gray light of morning crept higher along the walls, and with it came the knowledge that his life, quiet, solitary, and carefully contained, had already been changed. Whether he was ready or not, the land had taken note. The sun had climbed just high enough to thin the shadows when Ethan set the kettle over the coals. He moved with deliberate care, as if sudden motion might fracture the fragile calm that had settled in his cabin. The woman remained at the table, her hands folded loosely, watching him with quiet attention. The smell of coffee filled the room, grounding him in routine. Some things did not change, no matter who stood across from you. He poured 2 cups without asking. It felt right. They sat facing one another, steam rising between them like a boundary neither rushed to cross. "You don't have to stay," Ethan said after a moment. His voice was firm but not unkind. "Whatever your chief believes he owes me, I won't hold you to it." She studied him carefully, as if weighing the truth of his words rather than their sound. "I was not traded like a horse," she replied. "I chose this path." That surprised him. Frontier life had taught Ethan that choice was a luxury most people claimed only after the fact. "You don't fear me," she said, not as a question. "I'd be a fool not to respect you," he answered. "But fear?" "No." A faint smile touched her lips, not amusement, but acknowledgement. They drank in silence. The tension that had filled the cabin at dawn softened, replaced by something steadier. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. 2 people aware they stood at the edge of something neither fully understood. Outside, the land breathed on, indifferent but listening. She spoke of her people later, when the coffee was gone and the fire stirred back to life. "The council gathered after my brother's death," she said. "Some demanded blood. They said mercy shown to an enemy invites weakness." Ethan listened without interruption. He had heard such arguments before, voiced by men who believed violence was the only language the frontier understood. Others spoke for silence, she continued. They said the dead should be buried and forgotten. She paused, eyes distant. Then the chief spoke. Her voice softened when she mentioned him, carrying respect without fear. He said the land remembers all things. Every step. Every kindness. Every wound. If a debt is ignored, it does not disappear. It waits. Ethan felt a chill at the truth of it. Gold can be stolen, she said. Blood only calls for more blood. But a woman given freely can build a bridge where weapons cannot. He frowned slightly. And you agreed to that? Yes, she answered simply. Because I wanted to see the man who stayed when death was near. The words settled heavily between them. This was not payment. Not obligation. It was balance. The days that followed unfolded without announcement, one blending into the next like wind over grass. She learned the ranch as if it were alive. Walked its boundaries. Noted where the soil held water and where it resisted seed. She mended a broken fence without being asked, hands sure and practiced. Fed the horses, speaking softly to them in a language Ethan didn't know but understood all the same. He found himself watching her more than he meant to. Not with hunger. With curiosity. She noticed things he had stopped seeing, the way the land shifted before rain, the tension in a horse's neck before it bolted, the places where the earth felt thin and tired. She treated the ground with care, pressing seeds into soil as though offering something back. At night, she slept near the hearth. Never asked for his bed. Never complained of the cold. Ethan listened for her breathing in the dark, comforted by the simple proof that he was no longer alone. He began to rely on her presence without naming it. The work went faster. The silence felt different. Less heavy. Trust, he realized, did not arrive with ceremony. It grew quietly, like grass pushing through stone. They rode into town together on the 5th day. The change was immediate. Conversations stopped as they passed. Eyes followed them down the street, sharp and judging. Whispers slid through the air like thrown knives. Ethan kept his gaze forward, shoulders squared. He had known this moment would come. The frontier did not forgive differences easily. The woman rode beside him, head held high. She did not shrink beneath the stares. Did not challenge them either. Her silence was its own kind of defiance. At the general store, a man spat into the dirt and turned away. Another muttered something Ethan chose not to hear. His hand rested near his belt, but he did not reach for his gun. Neither did she. They moved through town together, a united front without words. When they rode out again, dust trailing behind them, Ethan realized something had shifted. The world had seen them. And in that shared exposure, an unspoken bond had taken root, one that would soon be tested by more than whispers. The bridge between two worlds was being built not with speeches or treaties, but with quiet endurance. And the land, as always, was watching. The trouble announced itself the way it always did on the frontier, on horseback and without apology. Ethan saw them from the rise beyond the corral, dark shapes cutting across the pale land, moving fast and with purpose. 6 riders. Maybe 7. Rifles slung openly, no effort made to hide intent. Dust climbed behind them like a warning sent too late. His body reacted before his thoughts caught up. The familiar tightening settled in his chest, the cold clarity that came just before violence. He turned back toward the cabin at once. She was outside, hanging freshly washed clothes on a line stretched between 2 posts. The morning breeze lifted her hair, sunlight catching on the beadwork at her sleeves. For a moment, the sight rooted him where he stood. Then he moved. "Inside," he said, keeping his voice steady. She looked at him, read his face, and nodded once. No questions. No fear. Ethan reached the cabin, checked the rifle by the door, and stepped back outside. He placed himself between the rider's path and the woman without thinking. The land felt suddenly exposed, every inch of open ground offering no cover, no forgiveness. The horses thundered closer. Faces resolved from dust, men he recognized from town. Hard eyes. Set jaws. Trouble that had decided to come calling. Ethan planted his feet. If this was the moment the bridge broke, he would not be the one who stepped aside. The riders pulled up hard, horses snorting, hooves tearing at the dry earth. Their leader swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with deliberate force. He wore a thin smile that never touched his eyes. "Cole," he said. "Word travels fast out here." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. The man's gaze slid past him, toward the cabin. "You got an Apache woman living on your land," he continued. "That kind of thing brings trouble." "She's not your concern," Ethan replied. A few of the men laughed, low and ugly. One spat into the dust. "Best you hand her over," the leader said. "Before it gets worse." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Violence. Fire. Blood. The old frontier solutions. Ethan felt anger rise, but he kept his voice level. "You'll leave. Now." The smile vanished. "You don't get to decide that. Folks like her don't belong on a white man's land." Before Ethan could respond, she stepped out of the cabin. The men stiffened. Surprise rippled through them like a sudden wind. She moved to Ethan's side, her presence calm and unyielding. "I belong where I choose," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the open ground. "And I chose here." The leader sneered. "You expect us to believe that?" The land held its breath. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the riders and the woman. He did not raise his weapon. He did not lower his guard. "She's under my protection," he said. The leader laughed. "Protection? From what?" "From men who know how the world works." The insult burned, but Ethan did not flinch. He felt the woman's presence steady at his back, like stone beneath his spine. "I was not taken," she said. "I came by choice." One of the riders shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his rifle. Another glanced nervously toward the surrounding hills, suddenly aware of how open they were. The tension tightened, pulling every nerve taut. One wrong move would tear the moment apart. Ethan felt something settle inside him then. A clarity sharper than fear. The line between obligation and desire dissolved completely. This was no longer about debt. It was about truth. He turned slightly, meeting her eyes for a brief second. Understanding passed between them, wordless, absolute. Then he faced the men again. "She's my wife," Ethan said. The word fell into the dust and did not break. Silence followed. Thick. Unforgiving. The leader stared at him, searching for hesitation, for doubt. He found none. Before anyone could speak, a sound drifted down from the hills. Low. Measured. Hoofbeats. The men from town shifted uneasily as movement revealed itself along the ridgelines. Shapes rose where there had been none, Apache riders emerging as if drawn from the earth itself. Bows and rifles ready. Eyes fixed and patient. They had been there all along. A voice carried across the land, calm and powerful. "This ground stands protected." The chief rode forward just enough to be seen. "Harm them," he called, "and peace ends today." Fear finally did what reason could not. The townsmen mounted up in hurried silence, dust swallowing their retreat as they fled the way they had come. When the hills fell quiet again, Ethan exhaled slowly. He turned to the woman beside him. Surprise flickered across her face, then something warmer. Something deeper. "You spoke with courage," she said. "I spoke the truth," Ethan replied. And in that moment, the choice was no longer his alone, it belonged to the land that had heard it spoken aloud. The sound of fleeing hooves faded into the distance, swallowed by the wide breadth of the land. Dust lingered in the air long after the riders were gone, hanging like a memory that refused to settle. Ethan stood where he was, chest rising and falling slowly, as if he had just stepped back from the edge of something final. Around them, the hills returned to stillness. The Apache riders remained for a moment longer, watchful, then melted back into the earth from which they had appeared. Silence followed. Ethan turned to face the woman. Up close, the weight of what he had spoken pressed down on him. The word, wife, had not been planned, yet it had come with a certainty he could not deny. Out there, in the open, it had felt like the only truth that mattered. I didn't mean to bind you, he said quietly. I won't do that. Not ever. She studied his face, searching past the words for intent. You spoke when it mattered, she replied. That has meaning. I won't pretend it doesn't, he said. But I won't make a cage out of it either. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of dust and grass. She nodded slowly. Among my people, a vow made under threat is no vow at all. Only choice endures. Relief loosened something in Ethan's chest. Whatever stood between them now was no longer shadowed by debt or fear. It was open ground. Evenings found them by the hearth, firelight shaping the cabin walls into something softer than before. She taught him her language one word at a time, patient and precise. He stumbled over sounds his tongue had never known, and she corrected him without laughter. Each word carried weight: land, wind, memory, balance. Not things to be owned, but understood. In return, he showed her how to read the sky. How to smell rain before it came. How to calm a horse spooked by shadows. How to coax life from soil that resisted hope. They worked side by side during the day, hands close but never hurried. Shared labor blurred the line between teacher and student until neither could say who was guiding whom. She told him stories of spirits that walked unseen, of ancestors carried in the wind, of land that remembered every footstep laid upon it. He listened, not with doubt, but with the quiet respect of a man who had seen enough of the world to know it held more than he could explain. The distance between them shortened, not in touch, but in trust. Intimacy grew in the pauses, the shared glances, the understanding that neither owed the other anything. What bound them was choice renewed each day. They did not rush toward ceremony. When the time came, it came without announcement. Witnesses gathered from both worlds, Apache elders standing alongside a handful of townsfolk brave enough to cross old lines. No preacher. No music. Only a fire burning steady between them. The chief spoke first, his voice carrying across the open ground. He spoke of balance. Of paths joined without force. Of a union meant to strengthen, not consume. Ethan stepped forward then, feeling the weight of every eye. He did not speak of ownership or protection as possession. Only of respect. Of standing when standing mattered. Of choosing her freely, as she had chosen him. She answered with words shaped by tradition and intent. Loyalty offered, not demanded. A promise to walk beside, not behind. They joined hands across the fire's warmth. No chains. No contracts. Just two lives meeting in full awareness. That was enough. The change came slowly, the way all real change did. Trade replaced tension. Apache riders stopped by the ranch without fear. Townsmen followed, curious at first, then practical. Grain for hides. Tools for meat. Conversations that once would have ended in fists now ended in nods. The land itself seemed to breathe easier. Fields grew greener. Fences held. Horses calmed. As if harmony had found fertile ground. Children watched her ride past with wonder instead of dread. Ethan noticed how eyes lingered less on difference and more on possibility. The ranch became a place where two worlds touched without breaking. And at its center stood a man who had chosen mercy when it cost him nothing, and gained everything when it cost him everything. The vow without chains held firm. Not because it was sworn loudly, but because it was lived daily. The land remembered that. Time did what speeches never could. Seasons turned, one folding quietly into the next. Spring softened the ground. Summer filled the fields. fall brought trade wagons and shared fires. Winter came and went without blood staining the snow. Children appeared where there had once only been wary adults. They ran between horses and fences, laughter carrying across the open land. Some had dark hair and quick eyes. Others pale faces and freckled skin. No one stopped to count which side they belonged to. Paths that had once been avoided now crossed naturally. Apache riders and townsmen met at the ranch, trading goods, words, and glances that carried less suspicion than before. The old tension did not vanish, it thinned, stretched, and slowly lost its grip. Fear faded into familiarity. Ethan watched it all with quiet amazement. He did not claim credit. He had learned that balance rarely belonged to one person. But he understood that choices left footprints, and those footprints invited others to follow. The ranch became known as a place where arguments ended before they began. Where guns stayed holstered. Where a man could arrive wary and leave thoughtful. The land itself seemed to approve. Crops grew thicker. Water held longer in the soil. Horses stood calmer in the corral. As if harmony, once planted, had taken root deeper than any fence post. The proof was not dramatic. It was steady. On quiet afternoons, Ethan sometimes sat alone on the porch, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before him. He thought of the man he had been, the one who rode hard and spoke little, who believed survival meant keeping the world at arm's length. That man had measured life in distance and danger. Mercy had not fit easily into that accounting. Yet here he was, living inside the consequence of a single choice made on a dark trail. A choice that had cost him nothing in the moment and given him everything in return. He understood now that kindness carried weight. That it traveled. That it demanded an answer, not in gold or blood, but in responsibility. The true cost of mercy, he realized, was courage, the courage to stand by it when challenged, to speak truth when silence felt safer, to choose again when the world offered an easier path. The reward was not peace alone. It was becoming more than the frontier had told him he was allowed to be. One morning, before dawn, Ethan woke the way he always had, alert, aware, listening. The cabin was quiet, washed in gray light. The fire breathed low on the hearth. Beside it, his wife slept. Her face, once guarded even in rest, was calm now. The lines of vigilance softened by trust. Ethan watched her for a long moment, careful not to wake her, struck by the simple miracle of it. This peace had not been taken. It had been chosen. He stepped outside, letting the cool air fill his lungs. The prairie stretched wide beneath the rising sun, whole and unbroken. The land felt settled, as if it, too, had found its balance. When he returned, she stirred, eyes opening to meet his. "The land is peaceful," she said softly. Ethan nodded, reaching for her hand. "Because you are here." The frontier remembered many things: violence, conquest, loss. But it remembered kindness too, even when men tried to forget. Two lives had crossed not by force, but by mercy. Not by conquest, but by courage. And from that crossing, something enduring had grown. The land remembered. It remembered the man who stopped when it would have been easier to ride on. The woman who chose peace without surrender. The vow made without chains and kept without fear. Their story did not end in legend or song. It lived on in quiet mornings, shared work, and children who knew a different way. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor it. Like the video to support stories of courage over cruelty. Comment below, do you believe one act of kindness can change history? And subscribe for more powerful Wild West stories where humanity survives the frontier.